A year has passed since the most intimate story was shared. Time flies relentlessly, and last month, her son turned 6. This little person miraculously demonstrates an incredible ability to adapt to the changes that so suddenly burst into his life. It has only been 6 months since his mother left their shared home, and he has already stopped crying when they part. Now, every goodbye is illuminated by his bright, gentle smile, like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. And this evokes a storm of conflicting feelings in her. On the one hand, she feels immense relief, realizing that she is no longer the cause of her beloved son's tears. But on the other hand, her heart is gnawed by anxiety. Is this angelic smile not hiding a deep longing that he carefully hides from others? Significant changes have also occurred in her ex-husband's life, as if a new chapter has opened in his destiny. He is engaged to a girl named Beth and is already planning a wedding celebration, which is to take place in 6 months. The irony is that despite the fact that she was the initiator of the breakup, the news of his new love pierced her heart with acute pain. It was especially hard to see them together within the walls of the house, which was once built with love and hope for a happy future together, a house into which she had put so much effort and soul. She found out about his engagement quite by accident when she brought her son to his father. Fate decreed that she became an involuntary witness to their passionate kiss, and memories of the times when her husband showed her the same tenderness and passion instantly flashed in her memory. To attract their attention and interrupt this moment, she coughed slightly. Beth, seeing her, was embarrassed and blushed, as if caught red-handed. The ex-husband, on the contrary, seemed pleased with her unexpected appearance, as if he had been waiting for this moment to demonstrate his new life. Her gaze involuntarily fell on the ring, sparkling on Beth's finger, a symbol of their upcoming marriage. The ex-husband, without hiding the triumph in his voice, announced his engagement and upcoming wedding, as if wanting to deliver her the final blow. She found the strength to smile in response, although it was clear from her ex-husband's face that he enjoyed causing her pain. In confirmation of his feelings and intentions, he kissed Beth again, as if taking revenge for a past betrayal, as if wanting to prove that he was happy and moving on. After kissing her son goodbye, she left, feeling a storm of emotions rising in her soul, like a tsunami of memories and unspoken feelings rising. The author expresses sincere gratitude to all those who showed understanding and support during this difficult period of her life. Despite the fact that she does not know these people personally, their words of sympathy and participation were of great importance to her, like a ray of hope in the dark realm of despair. Every person is familiar with the feeling when a minor mistake turns into serious consequences. The main character of this story also encountered something similar, without suspecting what her action would lead to. Trust, the cornerstone of any relationship, requires painstaking work to create and instantly collapses from one wrong step. Regret for the mistake made still torments the soul of this woman, 36 years old, married to a man of 40. The heroine's husband is a respected professor at a local university, where she herself has held the position of associate professor for the past 3 years. An attractive salary and a flexible work schedule were decisive factors in moving to this position. Her husband played a significant role in her employment, being a senior professor with an impeccable reputation. Their acquaintance took place within the walls of the university when the heroine was accepted as an assistant under the guidance of her future husband. She immediately felt attracted to the intelligent and witty man. Working in close contact contributed to their rapprochement. Conducting classes together, checking tests after work. Common interests and goals brought them closer, and soon they began a romantic relationship. It all started with casual conversations and exchanging jokes, turned into joint lunches and more time spent together. Mutual attraction was obvious, and soon they became a couple. After a year of relationship, the husband proposed to her. The heroine, charmed by his care, authority, and respect he enjoyed at the university, agreed. The wedding was modest but happy. The heroine's family life was remarkably successful. She left her former home and moved in with her husband in his modest dwelling. Their shared happiness seemed unshakable, and life seemed beautiful and cloudless. They worked side by side, sharing the joys and hardships of the working day, and then returned together to their cozy home. The heroine was happy and quite content with her marriage, feeling that she had everything she had ever dreamed of. Her husband was the epitome of the ideal alpha male, strong, self-assured, and possessing irresistible charisma. He always knew exactly what he wanted from life and had the ability to achieve his goals. The protagonist admired his sharp intellect and tireless work ethic. She felt that they were made for each other, but fate had other plans, and she soon lost him. Just a year after their wedding, she made a seemingly insignificant mistake that ultimately cost her everything. It was a rash act that she didn't even think about at the time, but the consequences were unimaginably devastating. How she wished she could turn back time and correct that fateful blunder. It all started with the arrival of a new assistant professor at their university. Let's call him George. He was about the same age as the protagonist, charming, confident, and, to be honest, quite attractive. They had exchanged a few words casually a few times before, but it never went beyond a simple greeting. However, one day when the protagonist's husband was away, she was working in a small cafe near the university, and she and George happened to run into each other. After ordering a cup of coffee, they struck up a conversation. The conversation flowed easily and naturally, and they discussed a wide range of topics, from work to personal life. George turned out to be single and had recently moved to town. Communicating with him was surprisingly easy and enjoyable, and several hours flew by unnoticed. At the end of the meeting, they exchanged phone numbers, promising to stay in touch. The protagonist didn't attach much importance to this event. She enjoyed talking to George, but she was happily married and loved her husband. She couldn't imagine that this seemingly insignificant act, exchanging phone numbers with George, would be the beginning of a series of tragic events that would turn her whole life upside down. A few weeks after their meeting, a lively correspondence developed between the author and George. At first, these were innocent conversations about work and common interests, but soon their communication began to include hints of flirtation. The author admits that at first she couldn't believe what was happening. It seemed incredible to her that someone didn't know about her married status and who her husband was. George began sending her veiled, flirtatious messages that, if desired, could be ignored. However, the author didn't do so, responding to him in the same playful tone. She realized that she was doing wrong, but she couldn't control herself. The correspondence was conducted only in the absence of her husband in order to avoid exposure. The author convinced herself that it was just an innocent pastime, not posing a serious threat. One day, a serious quarrel broke out between the author and her husband. The sticking point was the question of having a child. The husband expressed a desire to become a father, while the author stated her unwillingness to take such a responsible step. This conversation had already taken place before, and then she made it clear that she didn't want children. The author emphasized that a child is a huge responsibility, and she wasn't sure that she was ready for such obligations. Attempts to explain her position were unsuccessful. Her husband was too angry to listen. In the heat of the moment, he said hurtful words, accusing her of shirking responsibility, which deeply hurt and saddened the author. The husband left the house to give her time to recover. Left alone, upset and vulnerable, she received a message from George offering to have a drink together. After some hesitation, the author succumbed to temptation and agreed to the meeting. She justified her actions by saying that her husband needed to be alone, which meant that she was allowed to spend time outside the house as well. With these thoughts, she sent George a reply confirming her agreement to meet that evening. The evening outing took them to a drinking establishment located far from the university campus. The bar, nestled on the outskirts of the city, seemed to deliberately hide from unwanted encounters with familiar faces. The atmosphere in the establishment was enchanting. Soft semi-darkness and unobtrusive melodies created the perfect setting for a relaxed pastime. Alcoholic beverages flowed like a river, and the conversations were light and witty. However, the situation soon began to get out of control. A considerable dose of alcohol played its role, and the line between reality and illusion began to blur. The narrator, without skimping, ordered one shot of vodka after another. George, who was always nearby, generously showered her with attention. A playful banter arose between them. The flirtation reached its peak, and for a moment it seemed that they were the only people in the whole world. On this evening, all the hardships, including the recent quarrel with her husband, faded into the background. The opportunity to escape from the burdens of family life turned out to be very useful. The chemistry between her and George was so palpable that it overshadowed all previous feelings. In a moment of passion, she committed a rash act, cheating on her husband. George, exhibiting gallantry, offered to escort her to a taxi. While waiting for the car to arrive on the sidewalk, he bestowed upon her a gentle kiss, leaving ample room for retreat. However, she did not seize this opportunity and reciprocated his affection. The degree of intoxication was so profound that the realization of what had transpired only dawned the following morning. The next morning, awakening was marred by a torturous hangover, as if a reckoning for the night's excesses. It took time for the fragments of memories to coalesce into a coherent picture of the previous night's events. The sudden recollection of the kiss with George caused her heart to clench painfully with the realization of what she had done. What have I done? The question echoed in her mind. Leaving the bedroom, she found her husband at the kitchen table. His demeanor exuded serenity, a stark contrast to yesterday's tension. There was no hint of reproach in his gaze when he inquired where she had spent the night. She replied that she had been out with friends, and he merely nodded in silence. Then came words of apology for the recent quarrel, as if he wished to erase the unpleasant episode from memory. He assured her that he was willing to give her as much time as she needed, and that there was no rush in the matter of having a child. His eyes shone with hope as he spoke of the future expansion of their family. At that moment, she was overwhelmed by a wave of unbearable guilt. While her husband dreamed of raising children together, she had allowed herself a fleeting infatuation with another man. Even if it was just a kiss, it became a stain on her conscience, an act she sincerely regretted. However, the past cannot be changed. She realized that she had made a serious mistake, and regret gnawed at her from within. Two opposing desires fought in her soul: to confess everything and unburden her soul, or to keep the secret to avoid destroying the fragile peace in her family. Fear of his reaction paralyzed her. She feared that the truth about her transgression would cause a breakup. Knowing his character, she understood that he was not one to forgive such infidelity. Entering her room, she noticed messages from George. In them, he inquired whether she had arrived home safely after their encounter. He also wrote about the impression their kiss had made on him and expressed hope for another meeting. Without wasting a second, she blocked his number. Every day she was tormented by guilt because of her dishonesty towards her husband. She sincerely loved him and understood that the truth could cause him deep emotional pain. However, confessing what had happened between her and George was beyond her strength. Every night, lying sleepless, she relived that fateful moment when she made a mistake. Guilt and fear weighed on her with such force, as if a heavy burden was squeezing her chest. Several weeks passed since that day, but the determination to tell the truth never appeared. Every time she tried to find the right words, a lump seemed to rise in her throat. In the end, she decided to remain silent. In the following weeks, she tried to act as usual with her husband, but every look, every touch made her feel deceitful. She felt like a traitor mired in lies. This agonizing state of guilt and fear continued until one day George appeared at a seminar organized by her department. Ironically, her husband was speaking at this event. At the sight of George, her heart sank. He was the keeper of her secret and could reveal the truth at any moment. To her relief, he did not say a word about that night and did not even show that he recognized her. He kept his distance, giving no hint of their secret kiss that had happened several months ago. On the one hand, she was glad of his silence, but on the other, the guilt only increased. It seemed to her that she was living on a powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. The fateful day came when the familiar world turned to dust. Monday morning was hectic. The protagonist was late for an important meeting with a colleague, and every minute of delay seemed like an eternity. Grabbing her bag on the run, she rushed out of the house and raced towards the university. On the way, it dawned on her she had left her phone at home. A brief moment of panic was replaced by the decision not to return in order not to exacerbate the lateness. The thought flashed through her mind that her husband, who had a free morning, would come later and be able to bring the forgotten gadget. Reaching her destination, she flew into the meeting. Despite the productive discussion, the heroine was haunted by an ominous premonition. As soon as the meeting ended, she hurried to her office, where a stunning surprise awaited her. Her husband was sitting at her desk, her phone in his hands. He was carefully studying personal correspondence. The heroine froze in the doorway, realizing that a storm was about to break. A small oversight turned into a catastrophe. Bitter disappointment and resentment were read in the eyes of her spouse. She felt like the world's biggest idiot. Her husband had just gotten up and handed her the phone, barely whispering, "Why did you do that?" He'd read her explicit messages with some guy named George, where the flirting had gone way too far. The mention of a kiss was the last straw. She was speechless, knowing there was no excuse for her actions. All she could do was hang her head in shame and wait for the inevitable fallout. Her strange behavior hadn't escaped her husband's notice in recent weeks. He had shared his observations with her, noting that her detachment and avoidance had made him anxious. He had assumed that her sadness, caused by the recent loss of their child, was still haunting her, so he tactfully gave her the space she needed, thinking it would help her heal. However, as he confessed, even in his darkest thoughts, he never imagined she was capable of such a painful betrayal. After these words, her husband left her office, leaving her alone with the gnawing guilt and shame. She sat at her desk, time seemed to stand still, and numbness gripped her mind and heart. At that moment, she realized that she had destroyed the most precious thing she had, her marriage. All because of a fleeting, thoughtless kiss that had turned into a catastrophe. After what felt like an eternity, she found the strength to return home. She needed to make her husband understand that what happened was a mistake, a terrible accident, and that her love for him remained unchanged. She found him in the living room, sitting on the sofa with a glass of whiskey in his hand. Approaching him with the intention of hugging him and explaining everything, she was met with a cold wall of rejection. He rejected her touch, pulled away, and she saw only ice and alienation in his eyes. An aura of anger emanated from him, which she felt in every cell of her body. She realized that she had inflicted a deep, possibly irreparable wound on him, and that no words or actions could ever make things right. It became imperative for her to reveal the whole truth. She explained to him that what had happened was just a fleeting kiss, an impulsive act caused by being heavily intoxicated. In response to her revelations, a storm of emotions flashed across the man's face, but he didn't say a word. Immediately after her confession, he left the house. After this confession, a series of days followed when her husband demonstratively ignored her presence. She had become invisible in his eyes. She begged for forgiveness, but he remained unyielding, avoiding even eye contact. She felt like a ghost, aimlessly wandering through the rooms of their shared home. Days turned into weeks, and a heavy silence reigned between the couple. The atmosphere in the house was filled with tension and unspoken words, as if a loaded gun was hanging in the air. She desperately tried to find a way to his heart, but he stubbornly pushed her away, refusing to even look at her. All her attempts were in vain. One night she tried to hug him in his sleep, but he rejected her touch. For a while she held on to the hope that if she continued to work hard at repairing their relationship, she would be able to earn his forgiveness. She believed that they could openly discuss what had happened and find a way to move forward, but it seemed her husband had already made a final decision about their future. One day he approached her with a serious look, indicating that he intended to discuss something important. A faint hope flickered in her heart as she sat down, preparing to listen to his words. She naively believed that perhaps he had finally left his resentment in the past and was striving to restore their relationship. However, her dreams were instantly shattered when he bluntly asked her to leave their shared home. He argued that he needed to be alone to sort out his thoughts, emphasizing that her presence was preventing him from concentrating. She felt crushed. Had their relationship really come to such a sad end? Unwilling to argue, she still held on to a tiny hope that the temporary separation would make him miss her, and everything would return to normal. Renting a modest apartment in the city, she left most of her belongings in the house, cherishing the dream of a quick return. In the new apartment, she was enveloped in a crushing loneliness. The days dragged on in bleak despair, filled with tears of regret for what had happened. Attempts to distract herself with work only provided temporary relief. Soon a new blow followed. She was fired. The call from the department head came like a bolt from the blue. She couldn't believe that everything in her life was crumbling before her eyes. Marriage, home, career. She had given her all to her work, but in the end, she lost that too because of some ridiculous mistake. She soon realized that her husband was behind it. He had always been domineering, but she never imagined he was capable of such a low act. Desperate pleas and entreaties to the department head to reconsider the decision went unanswered. The head explained that her husband had personally called and demanded her dismissal, threatening to resign otherwise, which the university could not afford. He shamelessly used his influence and position at the university to deprive her of her job. Left without livelihood or shelter, she felt cast adrift, not knowing where to turn or whom to seek support from. The heavy burden of guilt and shame for her mistake continued to weigh on her soul, and now she had to deal with the consequences of her husband's vengeful act alone. Time dragged on, days turned into weeks, and she desperately tried to find some way to survive, as her meager savings dwindled with each passing day. Sending out one job application after another, she was met only with indifference and rejection, sinking deeper into a feeling of complete failure in all areas of her life. But one day, something completely unexpected happened, as if a ray of hope pierced through the thick darkness of despair. She was contacted by George. He sent her an email because she had blocked his phone number. However, obtaining her email address was not difficult, as George was also a professor at the university where she once taught. He said he had heard about what happened and offered to help in any way he could. At first, she had strong doubts, as this was the person who had indirectly caused her current plight. She had already lost her job and faced hatred from her husband, and it seemed things could not get any worse. So she decided to take a chance and agree to meet with George to understand his motives and what he really wanted. The meeting with George took place in a cozy cafe near her house. His appearance, emphasized by an elegant suit, was complemented by a radiant smile playing on his face. He offered to buy her coffee, and they settled at a small table by the window. He listened attentively to her confession, in which she opened her heart, telling him about her problems with her husband, difficulties at work, and the feeling that her life was falling apart. In the process of telling her story, she felt relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders, as this was the first time she had shared her experiences with someone. After she finished, George sat in silence for a while, then leaned forward and took her hand. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I had no idea things turned out so badly for you." He looked into her eyes, and for a moment she felt like she was drowning in their depths. His gaze showed warmth and kindness that she had not seen in a long time. It was almost comforting. "I want to help you," he offered. His gesture was full of compassion. While her husband seemed to harbor resentment towards her, this man expressed a desire to support her. She thanked him for the offer but declined his help, fearing to further anger her husband. Accepting help from George could do more harm than good. Over time, as the narrator's situation became increasingly difficult, the thought of George's offer occupied her mind more and more. There were no other options in sight, and he seemed genuinely intent on providing support. He assured her that he had influential contacts in academia and was ready to assist in finding a new position. Attempts to contact her husband remained unsuccessful. Numerous calls to discuss the sudden dismissal went unanswered. He seemed to deliberately avoid any contact. Eventually, she decided to call George and tell him that she agreed to accept his help. George actively engaged in the job search process, and soon she was able to get a position at another university. Hope began to dawn in her soul that life was gradually improving. Successful employment was the first step towards restoring stability. He also provided invaluable assistance in writing her resume and cover letter, which significantly increased her chances of success. The narrator expressed her sincere gratitude for his support. Despite their brief acquaintance, George showed extraordinary care and concern. Perhaps he was driven by a sense of guilt for what had happened. After this incident, their relationship became strictly platonic. There was no more flirting or any inappropriate actions. George sincerely sought to help her in her professional development. The woman could not stop thinking about her husband, consumed by the desire to atone for her guilt and earn his forgiveness. She attempted to speak with him at the university where he worked, but he remained unyielding, not even looking at her and demanding that she leave. Desperate attempts to seek forgiveness yielded no results. Gradually, as the weeks passed, she began to settle into her new job. Despite the complexity of the tasks, the work brought satisfaction, and she was slowly but surely building her new life. She repeatedly tried to contact her husband by phone, but all her calls went unanswered, and her messages were ignored. Her loneliness in the small apartment was relieved only by George, who became the only person with whom she could share her feelings. However, just as she began to feel more confident at work, she was suddenly fired. She suspected that her husband was behind it. All her efforts had been in vain, and she was back to square one. Unable to contain her emotions any longer, she went to her husband's house and confronted him, demanding explanations and an end to his interference in her employment. In response, he flew into a rage, stating that she should have thought about the consequences of her actions before committing adultery. Apparently, friends had informed him that she had obtained the new job with George's assistance, which aroused suspicions in his mind about a romantic relationship between them. He expressed his hatred for her and regretted ever meeting her. Her husband's anger was so intense that she felt fear. She tried to explain that there was nothing between her and George other than friendly help in finding a job, and she swore her innocence, but he remained deaf to her words. In desperation, she made another attempt to justify the events of that fateful night, citing severe intoxication. However, she was met only with mockery and words that he did not believe her attempts to justify her infidelity. That evening, she realized that she had lost her husband. The detachment and coldness in his voice left no doubt that he was unwilling to forgive her. He had lost all desire to help her in any way. As she left his home, her eyes filled with tears, and she was overcome by a grim premonition that she would never cross the threshold of that house again. She continued to diligently send out job applications, hoping to find a new position, but all her efforts were in vain, and she received only rejections. Communication with George ceased, as every encounter with him revived the agonizing guilt for that ill-fated kiss and all the subsequent events that had turned her life upside down. One day, returning to her humble apartment after another unsuccessful interview, she noticed an envelope patiently waiting for her. Her husband had sent her divorce papers. Unable to hold back the tears, she gazed at the papers, realizing that her marriage, which had seemed so unshakable, was collapsing due to her fault. Only then did it dawn on her that one fleeting kiss had caused the collapse of her entire world. She never imagined that a single mistake could result in the loss of her marriage and everything she held dear. But now she was alone, without anyone's support. She had few close friends in this city, and those she did have were friendly with her husband, and of course, would not risk his favor by supporting her. Even her family could not be there, as they had all moved to another state due to her father's new assignment. The following days dragged on like an endless and painful series of trials. She experienced a wide range of emotions, from sadness to rage, from self-reproach to deep despair. Ultimately, emotional numbness gripped her, leaving only the realization that the only path to healing lay through independently rebuilding her life. Taking a deep breath and drying her tears, she resolved to face reality and move forward. The first step was signing the divorce papers. Fighting to save a family when the partner shows no desire to meet halfway proved impossible. Her husband had effectively abandoned her, although she did not blame him since it was she who had made the mistake of betraying him. After signing the papers, she headed to her husband's house to hand them over and collect her remaining belongings. He silently opened the door and let her in. After handing over the documents, she announced her intention to take her things. He simply nodded and pointed to the bedroom. Sorting through her belongings, she accidentally came across a small note written by her husband in honor of their first anniversary. "I love you more than anything in the world. You are my life, my other half, my accomplice." "Happy anniversary, my love," the lines read. These words brought on a new wave of tears. What went wrong? How did they end up at this point? Where had the former love gone? Gathering as many things as she could carry, she left the house. In the depths of her soul, she hoped that at least for a moment, a hint of longing would flash in his eyes, but it did not happen. Only icy detachment reigned in his eyes. Upon returning to her apartment, she felt an acute need for respite from the overwhelming problems and decided to take a walk. Lost in thought, she wandered aimlessly through the streets, oblivious to her surroundings. At one point, she nearly found herself under the wheels of a car, but fortunately, a stranger pulled her out of harm's way just in time. This incident, like a bolt of lightning, jolted her out of her apathy. She realized that she was no longer willing to play the role of a helpless victim and was determined to take her fate into her own hands. Without wasting time, she sent her husband a message, making it clear that if he was firm in his decision, she insisted on a speedy divorce. She received no reply, but soon his lawyers contacted her, informing her that the divorce proceedings would be quick and painless, as both parties had reached an agreement. The lawyers presented her with the terms of the divorce, according to which her husband was allocating her a fair share of the jointly acquired property. She knew she didn't deserve such generosity and realized that he probably didn't want to share his assets with her, but the law obliged him to do so. She asked the lawyers to convey to her husband that she didn't need his money or his property. Although she was in dire need of funds after losing her job, she hoped that her refusal of material wealth would soften his heart and elicit forgiveness. However, no miracle occurred. The lawyers contacted her again, conveying her husband's words that her decision would not affect his position. The couple's divorce proceedings began shortly after the tragic events and, fortunately, went surprisingly smoothly from a legal point of view. However, the emotional side of the issue left an indelible mark on the woman's soul. Throughout the proceedings, the man remained aloof, avoiding eye contact and communicating solely with his lawyers. This icy behavior deeply wounded the protagonist, exacerbating an already difficult situation. The divorce was officially finalized by the court within 3 months. The woman recalls how she held on to a faint hope of reconciliation until the very end. When the judge asked her husband if he was sure of his decision, she subconsciously expected to hear a negative answer. Alas, her hopes were not to be fulfilled. The man seemed happy to sever all ties with her, while she continued to long for him every day. The protagonist admits that she would like to turn back time and correct the fatal mistake, but that is, alas, just a pipe dream. Now she has to live with the guilt for the ruined relationship. After the divorce was finalized, the woman met with a friend who had called her and insisted on meeting after a long break. Despite not particularly wanting to, the protagonist agreed. The friend, who was a mutual acquaintance of the couple, mentioned that her ex-husband was already seeing another woman. Realizing her mistake, the friend immediately tried to change the subject. However, the words had already been spoken, and the news sent the protagonist into a state of shock. She admitted her guilt in what had happened, but continued to love her husband and did not think about new relationships. The realization that he had moved on so easily caused her unbearable pain. Attempts to find out details about her ex-husband's personal life from her friend were unsuccessful. The protagonist understands that there is no one to blame but herself. If she hadn't made that fateful mistake, she would still be with her husband. Now that the past cannot be changed, she can only adapt to the new reality and move on. The realization that she could no longer meet her ex-husband or watch his relationship with another woman prompted her to leave her hometown. In the current situation, where job prospects seemed bleak due to the public attention surrounding the divorce, she found a job in a neighboring city. The salary was significantly lower than before, but the lack of alternatives forced her to agree to the move. In her new place, she felt invisible, trying to simply survive each day. Sometimes this task seemed impossible. She thought about saving money to see a psychotherapist, hoping that it would help her deal with the guilt she carried within her. In search of support and advice, she shared her story on Reddit, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to speak out. In response to the expressed interest in her current state, she admitted that she was not sure of her well-being. She still found it difficult to make sense of what had happened, and she tried to avoid dwelling on it. Memories of the past few months caused her to have nervous breakdowns, and she hoped that the situation would improve over time. Regarding attempts to contact her ex-husband after the divorce, she reported that she had tried, but he had blocked her phone number and social media accounts. She sent him a letter apologizing and hoping to resume communication, but as expected, she received no response. A year has passed since the last report, and many changes have occurred in her life during this time. The author hoped that she could finally put the past behind her. The frequency of emotional breakdowns has decreased significantly, and she regularly attends psychotherapy. She managed to keep her job, which inspired optimism. Throughout the year, she repeatedly tried to contact her ex-husband, but all attempts were in vain. She sent him a birthday card in the mail. Their wedding anniversary was a difficult ordeal for her, and she couldn't resist sending a letter which went unanswered. Her phone number was still blocked. A friend told her that her ex-husband had a new girlfriend. The author hoped that he could forgive her and at least resume communication. A simple conversation would have been enough, but it didn't happen. Eventually, she gave up hope and decided to move on. However, just as the prospect of a new life emerged, fate dealt a crushing blow. Last month, she had to visit the city where her ex-husband lives to process documents requiring his signature. She tried to contact him by email, but to no avail. In the end, she decided to meet him in person. Perhaps deep down, she was looking for an excuse to see him again. The meeting after a long separation caused great excitement. She approached his house and rang the doorbell, not imagining what awaited her. What she saw exceeded all expectations. A woman appeared on the doorstep, marked by youth and possessing beauty that surpassed that of the woman standing before her. The news of her ex-husband's new relationship after the divorce was no secret, but the sight of a pregnant woman was an unexpected blow. The rounded belly indicated about the 5th month of pregnancy. The sight of another woman within the walls of the house that was once her home, carrying the child of the man she loved, echoed with sharp pain in her heart. Involuntarily, the image of herself in her place, with a child from this man under her heart, arose in her mind. Memories of the argument that erupted the night she left George flooded back with renewed force. A sense of guilt, like a heavy burden, weighed down her shoulders. Thoughts that a common child could have become an unbreakable bridge, preventing the separation, persistently knocked on her consciousness. Gathering the remnants of composure, the woman resolved not to succumb to tears in her ex-husband's house, in the presence of a woman pregnant with his child. Introducing herself, she explained the purpose of her visit, the need to obtain his signature. The stranger, recognizing her, reported the absence of the owner of the house and offered to pass the papers on to him if they were left. In fact, she was being driven out of the house that was once her fortress. Meekly nodding, the woman dictated her address. She left that house, and tears blurred her vision, returning to her abode. After that fateful day, she was again overwhelmed by a wave of nervous shocks. At night, she was haunted by visions. Him, another woman, and their common child. In desperation, she turned to her therapist for help, making an appointment, but even that did not bring the long-awaited relief. She realized that guilt and regret had become her constant companion, from which it was impossible to get rid of. She decides to share her story here, in search of understanding and support, where it is not scary to face condemnation. Hoping for healing, she appeals to everyone who may know ways to alleviate her mental suffering, expressing her willingness to try any suggested method.